Welcome to the show. Today, I wanted to go more into the specifics of communication. And now, before I start this, I have to say that my week is going a little bit more askew than I thought it would be this week. So the main points of context are going to be today. I summed it down last night to what I think are the most important parts of communication. And what I originally had planned was to do like Mentality Monday. Where are you at with communication? Where are you at with, your social life or things, are things meeting your needs, and Try Hard Tuesday, which is today, is going to be more specifically about what you're having difficulty with, right? Then Whacked Out Wednesday could be something with like, what's some weird situations you've gotten into with this particular topic or something like that. Throwback Thursday, it could be talking about, memories of that you have regarding the specific topic and these things, we don't have to stick completely to these formats, but it's just where I was aiming to go. Fix It Friday, what you can do to fix and alleviate the situations and incorporate some of the stuff that we talked about during the week, that type of thing. So this is a good, easy topic to talk about. A lot of people can relate to it, and it's something that you can always learn and grow with. You know what I mean? So, talking about what my horoscope led to with between me and my wife, that was one of the things that I wanted to touch on today as being a key factor in what gets behind, people having issues communicating, and how things can get misinterpreted depending on your style of talking or how you listen to things or whatever. And I had touched on a little bit yesterday, talking about Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, which I think is a fabulous book, and I really think everybody should read it. I think it's a great book. He gives a lot of great examples about communication and where people usually have an issue. He points out his method of trying to fix communication is to talk about what's alive in us and what makes life more wonderful. And his interpretation of that is basically, instead of saying, how are you? He says to think of it in more of a way of what's alive in you, right? And what that means is what's going on in what's so active in you right now in this moment. Like what's driving what you're doing? What are you passionate about? What are you really feeling on the inside? And last week, having to do with this, I had talked about with my therapist. I said, I don't really enjoy like small time conversation. I don't like it, and I try to avoid it. And it sort of triggers me in a way, because I'm the type of person that when I ask you how are you, I want to hear the in-depthness of how you are. And I understand that not many people want to talk about how they are all the time, and or you might be going through something, but it was more in regards to my family and stuff like that, and just asking remedial questions when they don't really care to hear the answer, that kind of stuff. Like, I personally can't stand that. If you don't want to talk to me, I'm personally fine with not talking, just saying hi and moving on, but if you ask me how I'm doing, I want to give you the answer that I expect. So that's when I start to get a little anxious about the conversation if I know you're not ready to listen to that answer. You know what I mean? And the same thing back. If I ask you, how are you? Like even just saying, how are you? I am expecting a paragraph. I am expecting, or I'm great, I'm doing good. I really want to hear what you're really feeling, and that's kind of what Marshall Rosenberg touched on in the book. And he goes on to talk about how people discuss things and communicate differently, instead of doing things for rewards. Because he talks a lot about how, like in that example that I just gave about me and my family, right? So the reward behind that communication is, if like for me, the reward is hearing from you the information that I'm looking for, But usually with small talk, people have some sort of drive behind it. I feel like, it's either they're anxious about having silence, which happens a lot, or it's not having time to really talk about that on that level. Or it could even be that they want to, like, I know a particular relative of mine, she'll ask you, how are you? Because she wants to talk about how she is. And it took me a long time to navigate this portion of the conversation because, somebody like that, it's very difficult to feel connected to when it turns out to be all about them. So the reward behind her conversation is to be able to talk about herself. And the type of person I am, I'll talk about you all day. But don't ask me how I'm doing if you don't care to hear it. You know what I mean? So if you want to talk about you, say, oh my God, I had such a weird night, or I had such a, tell me, talk to me, just come right out and say it. I'm a very direct person like that, and, it's just a level of discomfort and awkwardness for me when you say, how are you? And I'm expecting to be able to tell you like, good, great, bad, sad, whatever. And, we skip right to you, and it's not in a selfish way. It's just because somebody asked me that question. What I do in that certain topic, in that certain situation with this person, is once I see them, if I know that they're this type of person, I'll be like, good morning, how you doing today? And I will cut the fat, so to speak, and get right in there and talk about what she wants to talk about, because I don't have to talk about myself, I don't need to. When I need to, I do, and I have no problem making it known. But I feel like it's very important that if you have something that you need to get out of you, the conversation goes best when I do that with her, and then she tells me everything that's on her mind. And then she'll be like, but I'm sorry, I forgot to ask, how are you? And then I have my opportunity to talk, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a different way of communicating, but that's how she communicates. So, instead of doing like what I found in that situation was a way to speak to what's alive in her. And that gave her the opportunity to talk it out and release it and then care about what's alive in me. And that's what he really drives towards, is instead of doing things for rewards and or like, I need sex, or I need love, or whatever. Or I'm mad because we haven't had sex in a week, or I'm upset because I don't feel like we're close, or something like that. He talks about taking the blame away from that other person and not doing that, but communicating your needs, where finding the root of what is driving your need for sex. Do you feel closer when you're physically with somebody? Do you feel more intimate? Is that what you really need? And communicating your need, and just saying, I'm feeling very vulnerable right now, and I would really like to enjoy some intimate time with you, like that type of thing, rather than saying I'm really annoyed because we haven't had it in a week or a month or whatever, but he talks about expressing what's alive in you and hearing what's alive in others, rather than coming from a judgmental perspective. One example that he uses in the book is he says, quote unquote, I'm sad you won't be coming for dinner because I was hoping we could spend the evening together. He goes on to explain that the emotion and the strategy are present, which is sad and spending the evening together, but not the need. But instead, he goes, quote unquote, I would prefer that it would be expressed this way. I'm sad you won't be coming home for dinner tonight because my need is very strong right now for some connection and some intimacy. And it's a very vulnerable statement, but that's sort of the beauty of it, is you're feeling in that moment, regardless of how that other person's going to respond. That's a whole different side of the topic. But you're expressing what you're actually feeling in the moment that you're associating it with what you need. So he goes on to say, it's accentuating the specific need with no other implications involved. No blame, no guilt. And like in the initial statement, I'm sad that you won't be coming for dinner because I was hoping we could spend the evening together. And like he said, what he switched it to was, even though it's saying I'm sad you won't be coming home for dinner tonight, it's sort of like, still on the baseline. If I were to switch that up, it would say something like, I have a very strong need for connection and intimacy, and I would really enjoy if you were to stay home instead of whatever you're doing, or if you were to stay home and connect with me or whatever, what you want to try to avoid is putting the blame on somebody else. That, now that I'm reading it, is not the best example that I could possibly have picked, but it was one that really stood out because it accentuated the need, right? So going into that, you really have to know how you communicate best. Some people communicate best through written word, which is tricky. It's tricky, and I'll go over why in a minute. Some people talk best. Some people are best using visual cues, for people who are, speech impaired or deaf, it might not be the tone of voice that's appropriate, or it might not be they may not be great verbal communicators, but they are very visual. They read your facial expressions, they read your lips, they read your emotion behind your face, so knowing what form of communication works best for you and what form of communication works best for them is a big part of it. Me and my wife go into if me and my wife had things to talk about, sorry, my mind just skipped out for a minute. If me and my wife had things to talk about, like issues or things that, serious things, then we won't try to talk about them through text. We used to do it a lot. But we found that whenever we're reading something through text, or whenever we are, trying to interpret things, one of us is in the wrong mood to do it. You know what I mean? That's usually when that stuff comes out in text because it feels so immediate, and it becomes this thing where like you're interpreting it how you mean it. You know what I mean? Like, even if you're reading what somebody else says, you're hearing your emotion in that text or in that email or whatever. So things can get obviously confused and mixed up. Things can become very, very awry, and it's not just like the phrasing that matters. Like I said, you also need to be aware how you're reading it into a situation. You have to know what it means to you. You have to be very aware of yourself in that instance. We're classic overthinkers. Definitely. That's a part of it too, is even if we're both in great moods, we can read something, and if it's not the proper grammar or the proper, I don't know, maybe somebody made a mistake and wrote something in caps, or who knows, things can get easily miscommunicated because we're both very short on time or whatever, and that can just drive issues with that. We found that, like I said, punctuation, grammar, and wording are used differently between us. How we say certain things can also be used differently. Like, I'm a very grammatically correct person. I'm not perfect, but I definitely, I always got great grades in English, and that's how I really understand what people who are writing mean, is where their accents are, where their commas and stuff like that are. I'm a very literal person like that. She's not. She might type something without any grammatical things involved, which can be confusing for me. So, it's just a practice of understanding how we both communicate with each other and just using that, So to avoid any issues with that, we try to talk things out in person, unless it's something that we have to do it over text. Like maybe she's working one of her 20-hour days or whatever. But when we do that, we both make a hard effort to recognize who we are talking to, between the two of us. We try hard to say exactly what we mean. And if it's something that we just need to make a point of and we know we're getting upset over it, we'll stop it in midst of the conversation. And that's hard to do. That's hard to do when you have such strong emotions behind what you're talking about, what you're trying to say. And to just stop that and be in that emotion for a little while is a very challenging thing, because you want to say something. You want to say something that means something to them. You want to say something that lets all that out. You know what I mean? Whether it's anger or happiness or sadness or passion or whatever it is, you want something that's going to express that. You know what I mean? So, we try to stick to exactly what we mean in text. We try to, not blame, but talk about like I feel or whatever, and try really hard not to put the blame on things. And if we do have to say something that sounds like it's blameful, I'm inventing words. If we do have to say something that sounds like it's blameful, we try to go into specifics. There was something that she had said that I didn't agree with. And I just said, well, I think it should be this way, but I understand where you're coming from. I know that when we do this, you feel this, or when we talk, or when I see where your point is when it comes to the kids. So I don't want you to think that I don't understand. I think we need to find a middle ground, for example, and it's just that sort of communication, especially in the crazy environment that we live in every day, me and my wife, with the 3 kids and schools and after school stuff and, therapy for my son and medication and, all the appointments and the school meetings and, the sick in-laws and the 2 separate work schedules and all the crazy stuff that you could possibly think of. You know what I mean? So, it's very important to remember to do that with each other, because of all the craziness involved and whatever. We can be highly stressed at any given time. If my wife brings up an issue with me while I'm at work, it may not even be about me. It might be, oh, Michael had a very bad day today, or, oh, the teachers really pissed me off today, or my job, whatever it could be. It might be something like that where, it may not be even relevant, but because I'm in such a stressful situation, maybe I just had a dog in CPR, or maybe, I just had a couple of euthanizing situations going on at the hospital, or maybe it was just busy and stressful and I didn't really have the time to look at it. Sometimes I read text and I'm so like active and amped up, I don't even think about my initial response. So what I'll do is I'll pause before I send it and I'll reread it. And I'll take a sort of self-check-in at that moment and try to recognize who I am in that moment and what I feel, because I might be super full of energy and I might be ready to fix all the problems. And, everything's going so positive or whatever, and she doesn't want her problem fixed. She wants to express her feelings, I have to be respectful of that. And, if I feel like I sent the text and didn't fully understand the situation at first, I will say that. I will say specifically that. Sorry, I sent it. I didn't really read much into it. I misunderstood. I apologize. I don't want you to think I'm trying to just, cut right to it or whatever. And we've been getting a lot better with that. Just talking about taking things outside of you and putting them, taking things outside of you and putting them into a more socially appropriate view of what's going on around you, So yeah, we say exactly what we mean. We try to resume it in person and we go through, and if there was any miscommunications, we try to explain exactly what our stance on it was. One problem that we still have that we're trying to get over is if we don't feel like the other person really connects to what we're saying, even if they do, and even if like, my wife tells me all the time, because I'll feel like she's not understanding something. She'll tell me, like, I get what you're saying. I understand. I get it. You don't have to keep repeating it, And I have a thing where, like, I just say it by accident, or I don't really mean to keep driving it forward, but I do. And she knows that, but she'll, we've gotten good at like, she'll be like, me being more aware of my doing that and her being more aware of being like, okay, maybe I have to tell him that he's doing it. Maybe he doesn't notice, stuff like that. And we don't have any problem just cutting it off and saying, I don't think it's, I think this is better continued in person because I'm afraid of an argument or misunderstanding, And it's very important to be open and honest and truthful with that. Also understanding differences based on race, gender, based on, social status, things like that. There's a lot of disconnection in social facilities, for lack of a better way to say it. And, I don't like that there is, but I think it's quite honestly hard to ignore that it's there, I would rather everybody be on the same playing field, but it's just not the same. People who have a whole ton of money opposed to people who are, middle class or homeless or whatever are going to have completely different methods of communicating in the words they use, in the way they talk to each other, in the way they express themselves, how they feel about certain things, and in their level of knowledge. The homeless person knows more about some things than the rich person does, but the rich person knows more about some things than the homeless person does. And it's just the difference in what you're living through, what's alive in you, The same thing with race and gender and, sexual orientation and things like that. We've all been through different situations that, they don't dictate who we are, but they dictate things like how we talk about and how we see things. And it's up to us in those situations to get away from ourselves in those moments and try to understand what the other person might be experiencing or going through. That's what he means by talking life into things. So yeah, having to do with that, I know it's a ridiculous comparison to real life, but Nicole Kidman was in a movie called Arrival. And I love this movie. Honestly, I hated this movie at first. I thought it was so boring at first. I did not like it. I didn't understand it. I was like, I don't know what's happening, but it's really annoying. And then it got to the end of the movie. Spoilers coming if you've never watched it or heard it before. But at the end of the movie, you come to realize that it talks a lot about how this alien race communicates. And Nicole Kidman plays a person who translates, not like a linguistic researcher or scientist or whatever. And it talks about how this alien race is seen as threatening. They're seen as, we're questioning them. We don't really know what's going on. So she's trying to understand them, as well as other like scientific linguists around the world. And, everybody's stressed out and it's coming to 0 hour. And, it's that kind of movie where it's just like, oh, there's going to be a major war that breaks out because we're not understanding something, And the end of the movie, Nicole Kidman kind of blinks out of the reality that she's in, and she goes into this state of weird time space. Like time space flows differently where she is now, and she's talking to like the other world leaders that all of a sudden just disappeared, and she didn't understand why. And they all kind of came to this understanding that the aliens were trying to show her since the beginning of the movie. That, their language is cyclical. Their language is a circle. It's all connected. It's all happening at the same time. There is no beginning. There is no end. There is no center. There's just everything. And it was a beautiful realization when I watched this movie that like, wow, that might be what another species or another whatever, how another race or whatever understands the concept of time and language and everything, things that we can't even comprehend, life and death and things like that. And to just see this interpretation of it, I was like, wow. And Nicole Kidman, being a linguistic scientist, couldn't understand any of this until she could grasp that one particular concept that these aliens knew about, but she just couldn't wrap her mind around it. It was a thing of what our limitations are and how we were raised as a race compared to this alien race or this alien species. And I really like that interpretation of it, because I feel like that's the way language is. And I'm happy I watched it to the end and just kind of stuck through it, because it was a beautiful thing. At the end of the movie, the other scientist that was like blanked out or whatever, talked to her, and he was like, things work differently here. Everybody's still stressed out where we came from, but now we're here and we understand that everything is happening at the same time. Everything is everything. Time works differently. You know what I mean? Like, you get the full concept of it. It was a few years since I watched the movie, so I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but I really like that example in terms of what we're talking about. So in terms of how to communicate better with somebody, like I said before, you have to know your medium. Everybody gives these like 10-step, 27 steps, 40 lists, of how to communicate better with others. And it's kind of the same things overall, right? So back to how to communicate better. You have to know your medium. Text, email, video, written, sign language, visual, things like that. You have to know your medium. You have to kind of gather an understanding of what their medium may be. My wife doesn't always communicate through talking as much as she would like to. And it's because she knows that she was raised in an environment where she's better off talking through text, or for whatever reason it's more comfortable. So she's had a big learning curve when it comes to that. And it used to be what causes a lot of conflict, because like I said before, I read things very specifically. I read punctuation and I read whatever. So when I send a text message, people have laughed at me before because I'm so specific at how I text. And it's just a natural thing for me. It's just how I text. I put comments, I put accents, I put capital letters where they should be, and things like that, period marks and whatever. And, people think it's funny, but it also irks me when people don't communicate responsibly, because, and I understand it's not like everybody's method of texting or communicating, whatever. That I think avoids a lot of confusion. If people know I'm a very specific texter like this, I have a problem with, this and understanding things if it's not written out properly, But like I said, I know with her, texting is one of her forms of communication. So I don't invalidate what she says when she texts me something, but she'll text me something and I'll respond okay, or I'll respond like, let's talk about it when you get home. And I don't, and then normally she reads emotion from text, and I'll say something like, to follow up so that she doesn't misunderstand, I'll say something like, I'm not mad, I'm not angry, I'm not sad, I'm whatever. I think this would be better discussed when we get home, or when we are in person, talk on the phone or whatever. And, she's growing to understand that. And it's a sort of discomfort to do that at first, because it's being honest for me, but it's also her, understanding and respecting that a miscommunication could come that can make the situation worse than it needs to be for whatever reason, So it's a level of growth, and it's a level of establishing a proper way of talking to each other, So definitely know your medium. The next thing I would say is to know your mood, for the same type of reason as know your medium. How is your mood going to impact the conversation? Also, is it a conversation that you can have at that time, mentally? Sometimes you're in a certain mood and you don't have the energy to talk. Sometimes you're in a certain mood and you're feeling angry or frustrated or whatever. Or maybe the other person is trying to express feelings of being sad or upset in some sort of way, and you're excessively happy. Those can all interact in weird ways when trying to communicate with somebody else, because Sometimes people need to be empathized with. Sometimes people need to feel that like a sort of, to connection for you to feel, for you to portray that you understand how they're feeling. So if my wife is like, the kids were just so difficult for me today and I just don't understand. And I come back with a happy-go-lucky, like, hey, it'll get better. It's fine. It's great. It's beautiful. Sometimes she used to misunderstand that as me trying to say, like, just get over it. It'll be fine. Be in a good mood. Be positive. And that's not what I was trying to do, So definitely moods take into account people's moods, take into account how people are feeling, what you're feeling, and go from there. And if it's not something that you can talk about, it might not even be related to you. Maybe you had somebody pass away and you just can't talk about funerals, or you can't talk about, other people being sick and possibly passing away or something. If it's something you can't talk about, honestly express that and express why, and just tell them, hey, I'm just drained. I want to respect you, but I don't feel like I can give you that proper respect right now, that proper attention right now. One thing I just actually researched yesterday that I thought was a pretty good idea, and I actually might start doing it, is if you have a tough time during conversations like I can, I've come up with tricks throughout my lifetime to cue into what people are talking about, when they're talking about it, what's important, when I need to cut everything else out of my mind and just focus. And in those moments, I will take notes. It doesn't matter if it's a conversation about love or sex or intimacy or baseball or whatever, it can be a conversation about anything. But what I used to feel weird about taking notes. I used to feel weird about, taking mental cues from and stuff like that. But it's really a form of this step. It's really a form of what I'm about to talk about, where you take the time to respect the person so much that you dedicate your energy to remembering that aspect of the conversation. So if you have a tough time during a conversation, don't be afraid to take notes, so that you can cue into the conversation better. In most cases, this is a method of improving your, quote unquote, in the moment memory, as I put it, and can be faded out. And if not, that's okay. The fact that you're doing it is going to put an extra level of emphasis of how much you care about that person in that conversation in that moment. If you are putting the energy to taking a note so that you can remember it, or because something important came up, that's what you need to do. If that's what's going to help improve your understanding of it. And sometimes it's building a new neural bridge. It's building a new neural pathway for you to start remembering things about conversations. You know what I mean? It's something for you to do that you can dedicate things to your brain that are going on that you might forget. And even in that context, there's times when, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, I utilize that to, my brain skips out in the middle of what I'm saying sometimes. And it can do the same thing if I am listening to anybody else talk. If it's something that I'm not really that interested in, or maybe I am, and I just have a lot going on in my head, I have a really difficult time focusing on that. And sometimes I have to just stop people and say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but, my brain just kind of skipped out real quick. Can you please just repeat what you said? And if I need to write that down, then I will write that down, because now I'm intensely focused. I'm putting that effort into writing it down. So I have something else distracting my hand, something else, another side thought process going on with writing it down. And I'm paying attention to what I'm putting in that book. So it dedicates it more into my brain so I can focus better. In that respect, because I come from an ADHD mindset, this tip can be helpful with talking to those with ADHD, autism, Alzheimer's, anything is, mentally related. But it also can be extremely effective and useful. And it's highly recommended in general conversation to be simple and direct. And even though it may be uncomfortable for you, you can learn. You can learn better, more effective communication by just being simple and direct. When I started tweeting, I still don't tweet that much, but when I started tweeting, they have the character limit that you're limited to however many characters they want to. I think it's like 250 or so. I don't know, whatever it is. But I'm a person who, like, when I post, especially if I post something I'm passionate about, I write a freaking story about it. You can see it on my Instagram posts. I write a freaking story about it. And, it was very painful for me at first to post to Twitter because I was like, well, this sucks. I can only post like maybe half a paragraph compared to what I would normally post, And it challenged me so hard. When you force yourself to learn to speak simply and more direct, you have to sometimes even strip the emotion out of it. Sometimes you have to strip like all the extra stuff that's just going to be static in the way that somebody hears it. And it can, like, if you're not direct, it can lead to issues with getting your point across clearly, and it can cause a confusion, which can lead to obviously like over-explaining, getting more anxious or nervous, divulging convoluted details about your intent. That's something that I was famous for doing. And the more I divulged in these details, the more confused people would get. And they would think I had ulterior motives behind what I was talking about or what I was doing. So that was quite annoying. And technology convolutes this even more. Like, hey, are you free after work? Or, hey, are you coming home right now? Like, these are just general conversations, even if you're texting or talking or whatever. Or, hey, do you have plans tonight? Instead, you can say something like, can you grab something on the way home? Like, do you have time? Or can you stay a few minutes late after work to finish this? Like, I know, you might have something going on or you might have some plans, but do you have like a couple of minutes you can stay to work on this, And that stuff comes across so much more clearly because you're being simple and direct. Do you have time to stay after work to finish this today? Please. It's very important. Besides like beating around the bush and, hey, do you, are you doing anything after work? Because that very question can mean so many different things. Like, yeah, I have plans later tonight, or I plan on going home. I don't really feel like staying here, or like it can also like put a misleading fact of interest or a misleading thought of interest in there that's not there, depending on the situation, obviously. So it's better to be just direct, simple, and just get your point across. And, like I said, sometimes that even takes the emotion out of it, which is important too, because even if you want to talk passionately and emotionally about something, depending on the level of importance and what it is, what the context is, sometimes it's more important to just cut right to the point. Hey, I feel like blah, or hey, I noticed blah, like I said, that's something that I used to do a lot, and I think it just got people more confused in what I was saying when I was trying to explain something. And the speed that my mind goes, and I do this all the time talking to my therapist, the poor guy. The speed that my mind goes is that, like sometimes you see it in my streams and stuff. When I talk, I'll just stop and kind of like, like I have to recollect myself. It's because my brain is light years ahead of where it was 15,000 thoughts later. And, I do it all the time. Like I said, during therapy, where I'll be like, I literally just forgot what I was talking about. Like I'm so far on this that I need to remember where I'm coming from, and, he's gotten good at listening like that. But, I can go on 150,000 different tangents, and I can go on things that I think are related, but other people may not see the connection to it. So to avoid all that, one thing I have a hard time working on, but it's something I need to focus on more, is being simple and direct, especially when I'm explaining things about myself. Another step would be encouraging input, which is, I kind of touched on this before. Whether it's receptive or expressive, encouraging input can help alleviate misunderstandings in the moment. So like, receptive, would be like, you're listening to somebody and, you're like, hey, I can you just back up for a minute? Can you elaborate on that, because I didn't really understand? Or, hey, can you explain that? I didn't quite get it, but I want to make sure I give you the respect that you deserve in this, And the expressive would be like, hey, did you hear what I said? Like, do you get what I'm saying? Do you understand? And some people overdo that, which is also a fine line. I have a friend who, we used to joke around a lot, because everything he said, he'd be like, I'm going out, to the nightclub, tonight. So, like, And sometimes he would get stuck in that. He would say it like 4 or 5 times. He'd be like, because his mind was going so fast, and I don't think he knew what he meant. So that's why he kept saying it, But the expressive portion of that is, do you really understand? Like, I want to make sure that I don't miscommunicate this. So how can I, if you don't understand, how can I help you understand it better? Or maybe I can say it differently or something, it's very important. Another thing is to watch subtle things, like I talked about a little bit before, body language, or in terms of text or writing, punctuation, as I talked about before. Body language is a huge thing. If your words are on point, but your body language is very questionable, it's going to make them question you. It's going to make them believe something else, because as humans, we're programmed to interpret these things because of survival needs. And that's, some people, it's in overdrive, so they take a defensive stance on it. Or some people, it's not there enough and they don't understand what the miscommunication is, so they're more aggressive in conversation, things like that. So it's just very important to keep an eye on that, and to know like what your tone of voice is. For me, I tend to talk very loud. On the microphone, I try to control my voice a little bit and try to, even out my voice so I'm not screaming. But there's a lot of times, and I get upset when she says it, because I don't always have control. It's like, I don't want to say it's a symptom or a side effect of ADHD, but it's related to it. Like, sometimes we have so much noise going on in our head that we talk louder. You know what I mean? And it's a lack of volume control in our voice. And so, like, if I'm excited, I'm going up here. You know what I mean? But if I'm not, I'm a big guy. I'm tall. I'm a big dude. I'm very bassy, and like my voice projects. I call it the voice of thunder. But I have to be cautious of that, because it can make people nervous. It can make people intimidated. So, like when I have face-to-face interactions with people, I tend to take the lower side, the calm. Like I've exercised my voice a lot, where I can kind of be more conscientious about it and put myself in like an autopilot mode to get control of that, Lastly, and this goes back to asking questions, knowing your mood and medium. This goes back to the 3 of those. I'm sorry. Knowing your mood and your medium and asking questions. Don't assume anything. And that's the biggest issue that people have with communication in general. And I close my eyes and react like that, because I've had such a big issue with that too. And I understand it, but it is such a pain point in a lot of conversations. Don't assume anything. If you don't understand, ask. If you think you might be interpreting it the wrong way, trust that instinct and ask for clarification, or explain to the person, like, listen, I'm just in a weird mood today. I feel like this is what you're saying. Can you please just, let me know if that's what it is, Being very direct and being very questioning about that shows that you care about the conversation. It shows that you care about how the other person feels, and it shows that you're respecting yourself enough to make sure you have clarity before jumping off the deep end, so to speak. So that kind of wraps up the stuff that I wanted to touch on today, that I think is the most intricate part of conversation, that I found most compelling about the research that I did and things like that. So I hope that you guys so far have enjoyed the show. I'm also working, to kind of expand my repertoire of how I want to format the show and lead in and lead out and do all that stuff. And I've never quite been a producer like that before. So this is a first episode for me. But yeah, so I had a good time doing it. But I will see you guys next time. Thank you very much for coming to hang out. I love you all. I appreciate you all. And I hope to see you again on the next one. Thanks, guys.